catch us when our heart is fading. You warm us when our love is cooling. You, God, ignite us. You enlighten us. You consume us. You refine us. You are fire, and we welcome your flame. You, God, fill the space that we make for you, and you shape the lives that are immersed in you. You cleanse us. You refresh us, flow through us, renew us. You are water, and we submit to that tide. You feed the seeds that we plant in you. You strengthen roots that are laid deep in you. You hold us. You will sustain us. You will nourish us. Bring life to us. You are the earth, and in you we ground our being. You will fill the lungs of those who draw on you. You will fill the sails of those who wait for you. You carry us. You move us. You lift us. You caress us. You are air, and to breathe of you is life. Burn in us, fire of heaven. Wash us, holy water. Grow us, ground of our being. Inspire us, breath of God. Remake us, O great Creator, in your elemental image.
Thank you, God, for Sean. Thank you for who Sean is. Thank you, God, for the journey that he's been on. Thank you for just being there with him the whole time. And just thank you for just the wealth of experience that that's given him and what he's going to share. We ask that you flow through him. Help us to receive it. Help us to open our hearts, our minds, our spirits to what Sean's got to say and what you're saying through him. Amen.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Good morning, you lovely people. Hi. I don't know if any of you are been following some of the Edinburgh Fringe. So I've been looking through some of the newspapers to see what the best one-liners so these are the clean ones, okay? Robert Garnham says, insomnia is awful, but on the plus side, only 3 more sleeps till Christmas. Dan Antopolsky, centaurs shop at Topman and bottom horse. I thought that was really lame, actually. Yeah. This one's for some of you older people. John Luke Roberts. How did the village people meet? Obviously, they led such different lives. And Marcus Birdman. As I get older, I've learned to promote what is good about myself. All the bad stuff, bigotry, intolerance, and prejudice, swept under the carpet. Not too far, I'll be needing you in my 60s. Ooh. That's not to say that all 60-year-olds are bigoted or anything like that, but that just sort of neatly slides me into, because we can, as we get older, we can either become much more mellow and rounded, and God's been doing a work in us, or we can become more rigid and intolerant, and I'm not going to change. So that's just a little bit maybe about little clue as to what we're going to be talking about. So I want to begin with some verses. We're going to be talking about, this is part of the fixed or fix series. So I'm going to talk a bit about dying to self. And I want to paint a bit more positive picture about that, because it really sounds awful, doesn't it? So what's our character like when we've been made whole? So, I just want to read some verses about dying to self. So Matthew 10:38 and 39, reading from the Amplified Version, says, "And he who does not take up his cross, expressing a willingness to endure whatever may come, and follow me, believing in me, conforming to my example, and living, if need be, suffering or perhaps dying because of faith in me, is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life in this world will eventually lose it through death, and whoever loses his life in this world for my sake will find it." Luke 9:23 to 25. "Then Jesus said to them all, Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. Whoever wants to be my disciples must deny themselves and take up their cross and daily follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Romans 6:5-7. For if we've been united with him in death like his, we will certainly also be united with him in a resurrection like his. For we know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin, because anyone who has died has already been set free from sin. And Matthew 10, finally, verse 39, those who try to hold on to their lives and give up true life, those who give up their lives for me will hold on to true life. So Jesus calls us to die to ourself and live for Christ. I don't know about you, but all this dying actually sounds pretty terrible, as I've said. So it sounds like Jesus wants to crucify every last vestige of ourselves, our identity, our personality, our values, our desires, our beliefs, and our possessions. So we've got to hand over everything that we are and lay it down before the cross. We become emptied and become nothing, and he becomes everything. And that's how I interpreted these passages for many years, and probably heard lots of sermons on that. And I sort of Googled dying to self and saw to see what sort of images that were sort of on the internet. I don't know how you feel looking at those, but actually this all seems a bit horrible and exhausting. This is some sort of negative, try hard, grit your teeth Christianity. And I've heard lots of sermons and read bits in books along these lines. So are we really to become some sort of robot or automaton remotely controlled by God with no desires, no brain, no free will? I think the message really seems to be, don't be you. That's the way I've been interpreting it. But I always wondered if I was missing something. And I think I was, and that's what I want to present today, something a bit more positive. So, today I want to introduce to you a concept of true self and false self, which I think gives a much more powerful, healing and freeing and life-affirming interpretation of what dying to self and taking up our cross on a daily basis means. So, the idea of true self and false self comes from a monk called Thomas Merton. I think he died in the late 60s. So he wrote about that, and it's been popularized, what he said, by a really good speaker, Richard Rohr, who's wonderful thinker, and wonderfully challenges the evangelical church and the Catholic Church in ways that maybe we haven't been challenged before. So he really does, he challenges me. So we'll come to true self, false self in a minute in more detail, but I want to give you a story about a chap I met about 10 years ago called Antonio. Antonio met on a course, and Antonio was a lecturer in ethics and psychology somewhere I think it was probably Essex somewhere, one of the universities somewhere, anyway, in that region. And he'd given that up to work with young offenders in a prison. And Antonio told me a story about some of the changes that he'd been going through. He was a Christian, and he'd been walking down his high street somewhere in Essex with one of those long golf umbrellas under his arm. And he was with his wife at the time, and there's some loud crack behind him, and he sort of turns round suddenly and hits this large sort of tattooed bloke behind him with the end of the golf umbrella. And the next thing, he's been punched on the nose and falls to the ground. And fortunately, I think his wife gets between them. But 10 minutes later, Antonio is sitting in a coffee shop with this guy who's called John, and he's beginning to talk to John, bringing John down and helping John think about his anger issues. So he's there with a serviette over his nose, mugs of coffee. That's spectacular. That's spectacular. To be able to pick yourself up like that. And Antonio had become very true self, very powerful. His false self would have probably called the police, and as Antonio said 15 years previously, he would have done everything he could with his intellect to humiliate the guy and probably sued him. So John had grown and developed and became more rounded, and Antonio had grown and become more rounded, and was able to begin to meet with John on a regular basis, and help John significantly. So, what's left after we've died to self? What's left? Antonio had died, leaving something more wonderful. So I want to have a look at this. I've got a bit of a handout. If we could you might have to share because I don't think I've printed off enough. So, but if you, can I hand out one lot there and one lot there? While that's being passed around, so our series is fixed or fixed, fixed or fix. So fixed is our true self, or our fix is our kind of negative way of dealing with things, working with things. We could say that that fixed or our true self is the fruit of the Spirit. Love, from Galatians, love, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. And that our fix, our bad way of dealing with things is murder, theft, adultery, hatred, jealousy, kind of all the 10 Commandments sort of stuff that we read in the Bible. So let's compare and contrast our false self and our true self. So our false self is building ego, status, and power, whereas our true self has died to that, no longer needs ego, status, and power. Our false self is losing its life. It's losing that bad life. And our true self has been crucified. The bad stuff has been crucified, but this new positive person is being resurrected. Our old self, our false self, is concerned with our character, concerned with our reputation, whereas our true self is concerned more with our character. I'm going to let you read down some of those. I just one there that sticks out. Kellen and I this week we're part of a group, and we've had somebody in the group who's very, very temperamental. Yes, Helen, that's you. No, we've had somebody who's really created a huge drama and has become a victim. And we didn't know about all that was going on, but he's really, really gone into victim mode. And so really we're seeing a glimpse of his false self, but his true self actually is an overcomer, doesn't gain purpose and meaning out of being a victim. So I'm going to give you sort of 5 minutes to read, or a couple of minutes to read down and compare and contrast those. And then I shall move on. Can everybody see? So I can alternate them on the screen. Do you want them on the screen? Okay, I can. Have we had long enough, or do you want a bit more time to read? You can take these away. I'll probably email Karen. Is Karen here? She's out. Yeah, maybe get Karen to email that out to everyone. I've got a few more on, which I probably could have handed out. Sorry. Okay. If you don't have one and want one, let me know. You've got some more there. Okay. So, when I was first handed this was probably about 7 or 8 years ago on a course. It was like, oh my goodness. And you can go away and you can go and find the verses that attach to those. They're there, okay? You can do that. So Richard Rohr tells us that our true self is the real us, the one that doesn't see everything in terms of black and white, right and wrong, logical versus illogical. Rather, and in versus out, rather our true self allows for shades of grey. It allows for exceptions and complexity and subtlety and incomplete answers and mystery. So our true self values logical thought, it values emotion, it values intuition. And it doesn't see any of those as an imposter. Your true self follows the truth wherever it leads, even if that's somewhere that's difficult or unpopular. So our true self keeps the mental files open, and that's what any good scientist does. Follows the truth wherever it leads. And our true self can always change its mind if new information comes in that sheds a different light. So, on the other hand, our false self is addicted to rigid ways of thinking. It doesn't want to change its mind. And I think as Christians, we can, end up with some very rigid ways of reading the Bible. So I think keeping an open mind. Somebody once said to me that having faith is having an open mind. I thought that was interesting. And when Jesus says have faith, he might just be saying, I don't know, but he might be saying, have an open mind about what I'm about to do. So some people, as with that joke, as we not necessarily get older, some young people are quite closed down. They're rigid and dogmatic. So our true self affirms truth wherever we find it. Our false self judges others, and we might dismiss a person's words because of something else they previously said or did that we disagree with. So our true self finds and affirms the truth and can find truth in surprising places. So in other religions, in other political ideologies, in other scientific understanding. And really, it's like taking an apple out of the fruit bowl. We find that it's bruised. There's something about it we don't like. So we can cut out the bad bits of anything that we don't like, and we can eat the good bits. We don't have to agree with everything, but our true self finds the truth wherever it is. Was it something I said? Our true self challenges existing methods and assumptions and preconceived ideas. It breaks down power bases and silos. You know, in the office, we have power bases and silos and rigid ways of thinking and doing things. Our true self can break those down. It takes some skill at times. It identifies them and tackles them. Our true self shares knowledge and resources, whereas our false self holds it and keeps it all to ourselves. I think our true self can endure hardship more easily. It can endure pain and sacrifice more easily than our false self. And this is because our true self has less buttons. It's more healed. It's more whole. It's the buttons, those sore points that get pressed, and that leads to suffering. And our true self has less of those. And I think this is why Christ was able to do what he did. He was able to, his true self-nature meant that Satan, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, couldn't press his buttons because he didn't really have any. And it meant that they couldn't exploit any of his weaknesses, which meant that he could bravely carry out his ministry in an incredible way that most of us couldn't do. And he did that knowing that he was going to the cross. Wow. I think that's incredible. So I think that Christians who can make big sacrifices and endure cruel suffering do so because God has developed in them a high degree of true self. They've got very few buttons. They've grown, they've developed, they've matured. And that lessens their sense of psychological suffering and loss. Our false self often has low self-esteem. It sees God as some sort of cranky, abusive authority figure. It feels compelled to earn God's love. Our false self defensively brings sort of gifts and acts of service, to appease an angry God. And it's driven to to always get things right and to lead theologically perfect lives. Really, there's no such thing. But our true self can just relax and be with God. We don't have to bring everything. And everything that we do bring is brought freely in a relaxed, well, hopefully more relaxed way. And I think sometimes all that angst and bringing God our service and our gifts in that difficult way is just, sometimes that's a protection against really connecting with God. And all we're going to get when we connect with God anyway is unconditional love. So as we heal and develop, we become more true self, and actually we become more relaxed and comfortable in our own skin. And we're able, like Antonio was, to keep a cool head when the going gets tough. So our true self is less panicked by difficult events. There's kind of three areas that coaches refer to, which is in terms of stress. We have our comfort zone, we have our stretch zone, and our panic zone. And our comfort zone is that place, it's in front of the TV with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. It's enjoyment, it's relaxation. It's not challenging us particularly in any way. It's a good place to be. It's an important place to be. Our comfort zone is a Sabbath place. We need that time. It's important that we get it, and most of us don't. But we can't stay there all the time. We need to be stretched. And our stretch zone is the place that we learn. Our stretch zone is a place of enjoyment. Whether it's at work or on the sports field or whatever. We don't really learn anything in our comfort zone. So we want to be in our stretch zone in order to grow and develop and to move from our false self to our true self. What we don't want to do very often is end up in our panic zone. Our panic zone is not a positive place to be. Our brain changes temporarily. Our frontal cortex, where we do our rational thinking, partially switches off. Blood gets diverted to our muscles, readying us to run our fight. So not a good place to be. So we want to, in life, as much as possible, be in our comfort zone and stretch zone. But I think some of us have got some quite big panic zones. I've certainly had in life some pretty big panic zones. And I'm working on those. Sorry, just let me refer to my notes. So, as we journey with God, He expands our comfort zones. He expands our stretch zones. And if we look at Jesus, He had an enormous comfort zone and probably an enormous stretch zone. He was able to do really countercultural things. He walked into Samaria. You don't do that. You certainly don't go near women, especially that sort of woman, who's drawing water from the well at midday. So he kissed lepers. He hung around with all the little people and the despised people that you weren't supposed to. He was comfortable with loads of different types of people. At the same time, he was able to go to dinner with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the people who were intent on catching him out and killing him. Amazing. He was comfortable, or maybe stretched at least, with It was comfortable. It was much easier. So I think Jesus had a very small panic zone. I think he probably went into that panic zone in the Garden of Gethsemane and probably on the cross. But even on the cross, he's able to have a conversation with the thieves beside him. He's able to forgive. I think it's incredible. So Jesus had, and this is what this crucifying, I think, is trying to do in us. God wants to crucify, which is a really extreme word, really, that false self in us, so that we become more true self. So, let's face it, our true self is much better, it's more fun-loving, it's more free, it allows for more creativity, different thinking, it breaks us out of our self-imposed boxes, our prejudices, our preconceived ideas. It frees our minds and our imaginations. It dreams big dreams. It sets ambitious goals. It's a beautiful thing. It's effective. It's wonderful. And at the same time, God treasures the person that you were born to be. God doesn't want to remove your personality, your values. He doesn't want to empty you of all that you kind of are at your core. He wants to keep all that. He just wants you to get rid of the negative stuff, the false self stuff that was never there in the first place. Very little of that stuff is useful. So God treasures your original divinely created self. He doesn't want to obliterate the part of you that makes you uniquely you. God works within you to reshape you as the person that you were always meant to be. He gets rid of, crucifies the bits that were never truly a part of you. So he's actually trying to make you more like you than you ever were before. And that is a painful process. Removing this false self and moving to the true self is a hard process. And it can feel at times like a crucifixion. There is a dying. But the result is much more positive, much more interesting, much more life-giving. So, next time, fortnight's time, I'm going to speak about something a bit different. But it's kind of, again, in this fixed series. Right, I've lost track of myself now. I think I'll probably give up there. You're going to say something, Ben?
You know the bit about we're very unwilling, aren't we, often to surrender or to be crucified. Aren't we?
Yeah.
We're reluctant, we rebel. Can you talk a little bit more about how life's events can cause us to...
You're saying we're unwilling to surrender our old false self habits?
I really believe that sometimes without difficult circumstances, we then don't grow, because we're in a way we're forced.
We're so comfortable with who we are.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Sometimes I think things have to happen to us, because then you're pushed into that. Pushed into that place. We wouldn't step out of our comfort zone often on our own.
Unless we're pushed.
Into it by circumstances or by a relationship or by...
Exactly. I think there are a couple of things that change us most easily. Suffering. You know, sometimes we've got to make mistakes. We've got to fail in order to know that we need to change. we've got to fail in some way to know that something's wrong, that something needs healing. So actually failure is not necessarily a bad thing. It's our sin that kind of identifies that we need to move and shift. And that involves suffering. That those failures involve suffering. Is that what you're saying? And those are the things that give us the impetus, hopefully, to shift. But yeah, I think so. Suffering, some good friends, some good books, or the good book, and good books. I think those are the things that help me change. And I've made loads of mistakes, and they are valuable for learning. You know, they're shifting me in this direction. And I've not got there. I have no sense of having arrived at this true self. I've still got lots of stuff that's not right. But I'm moving. The Holy Spirit is moving me in this direction. And I think that sort of you've just reminded me of one last point. Our false self will really beat ourselves up for not, it's that final bit on the piece of paper. Our false self will beat us up for not being who we're supposed to be. But our true self knows that we're not, our true self part of us knows that we're not perfect and that we're on a journey and it's going to take time. You know, this is a lifetime's journey from here to here. Is that, have I answered or partially answered? Okie doke. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I think we really felt that we wanted to give people a bit of space just to take on board what Sean said. So we're just going to sing a song. Just feel free to let it wash over you. It talks a lot about that love won't let us stay the same. And that's ultimately what we want, isn't it? That we're moving from that place, a place that is not who God meant us to be, that we want to be whole. And then after that, we're just going to pass the bread around. So you don't have to come up, you don't have to do anything. Just stay in a place where God can speak to you, where hopefully you can connect with him. So if you could do that, Ben, after this song, just send the bread down, and then we'll send the wine down, and take it in your own time. There's no pressure or a moment where you have to do it. Let that be directed by God in a moment where you feel is right.